Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, Objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on Objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in Tango, E as in Echo, and W as in Whiskey. I am new to Objectivism and still reading up on it. I have a young son and I'm wondering how Ayn Rand would view the notion of a parent being willing to sacrifice his own life for the survival of his child. Is it possible to have the life of one's own child or spouse, partner, etc. as one's highest value, or would this corrupt the standard of values being one's own life? No, it wouldn't corrupt the standard of value. That is totally possible. In fact, you are not really living life to the fullest if there's nothing you would die for or die without. Life is not intrinsically valuable. It is valuable because it can feel so good to live it. And part of the way it feels so good to live it is to develop values. These are things necessarily external to you in some sense, or at least not automatic. You have to act to gain and keep things. You can develop values that are so great that if you lost them, life wouldn't be worth living. Life, as I say, is not intrinsically valuable. It has to be worth living. I mean, would you say, well, suicide in a concentration camp, that's immoral because you're putting something above the standard of life? No. If you can't be happy, you shouldn't try to live. There's no duty to live. There's just the obligation to live if it would be worth it to you to be happy, and that's possible. And for normal people, that is their context. So yes, children, spouse, those are major values, and it's totally possible for those to become so great that you would rather die than live without them. And therefore you might take action such as dying for their survival. And I wouldn't call that a sacrifice as you did in your question. It's not a sacrifice to choose death rather than living a tortured existence, which is what your option is. So no, having something you would die for is not a corruption of life as the standard of value. In fact, you don't really hold life as the standard of value, or you haven't actualized it to the degree possible if there is nothing you would rather die than live without. Or there is nothing without which you would rather die. I can't figure out the grammar on that. I didn't sleep last night. All right, next question. I remember watching this Yaron Brook video on the Eastern philosophy idea that we need pain to feel pleasure and vice versa. And he said the objectivist view is that we don't, and we'd feel pleasure regardless, and I've heard similar things from Rucka. But I know you don't hold your own in high regard, and your video on hate speech, you said something to the effect of, we couldn't have love without hate. So what is the actual objectivist view on that subject? Well, I don't know precisely what Yaron said, so I'm not going to criticize him on this. Your confusion here is based on your not distinguishing between potential and actual. You don't need actual pain to feel pleasure. You don't need actual failure to be successful. But those things need to be possible for the alternatives to have any meaning. It's not success if it's guaranteed. Success means you achieved this in the face of an alternative. If there's no alternative, then there's no success. Now, that doesn't mean you have to actually fail in order to be successful. In fact, if you just take a single case, you can't do both. But one only has meaning because the other is possible. Failure only has meaning because success was possible. It's not failure if it's guaranteed, if it's a foregone conclusion. So in terms of pain and pleasure, well, presumably you could create a creature that was only capable of feeling one. Fine. But if you mean in the broad context of, is it possible or desirable to have an organism that can only feel positive without the negative? No. Because what do pain and pleasure come from? They come from the alternative of life or death. In order for something to be alive, death has to be an option. So if you're going to feel pleasure, which comes from taking the alternative of pursuing life, then you're going to have the other alternative, which is pain that comes from taking actions that are against your life. Now, it doesn't mean you actually have to feel pain. It doesn't mean you actually have to die. It just means those have to be potentialities. A rock isn't surviving because death is impossible to a rock. It's not alive in the first place. A human being is surviving because death is possible. It's not actual while he's living, but the fact that it's possible is bound up in the fact that he's alive. If you can't die, you're not living. I mean that in a scientific sense, not in some poetic sense. It's not life if it's guaranteed. So yes, if you're going to be happy about achieving your goals, there must be the other end, where you would feel sorrow for failing to achieve your goals. That doesn't mean you actually have to fail and feel sorrow in order to feel happiness, but it means that the potential must exist. It doesn't have to actually exist, but it must potentially be there. You know, you're not playing a game if you're guaranteed to win. It's not winning a game if you couldn't lose. Doesn't mean you have to lose in order to win. It just means the possibility of loss had to be real. So that's the answer to that. What is the psychological motivation for nihilism? In particular, organized intellectual nihilism. It must be deeper than mere envy. Yes, it is deeper than mere envy. Envy is just one manifestation of nihilism. So where does nihilism ultimately come from? Well, every human being confronts implacable reality. At some point, he confronts that reality with desires that are contrary to it. He wants something, but doesn't want to have to obey the rules of reality in order to get what he wants. Now, when someone's desires come into conflict with reality, he has a basic choice. Act on the basis of reality and have his emotions come in line, or put his emotions, his consciousness, above existence, and therefore resent existence and wage war against it, against the law of identity, the fact that he needs to do certain things to get what he wants, that he can't just do whatever and get certain results, that things are what they are, and if he wants certain things, he has to take certain actions. He can't just want it. So nihilism is just a product of the latter course of action. It is just the hatred of the law of identity, and therefore existence. Existence is identity. Now, envy is just a product of that. It is just hatred of people who have sided with reality. They're not really envious in the sense that they want what other people have. I mean, they do, but in a contradictory way. You know, it's like, does Obama want America to be poor? No. He wants America to be poor and rich at the same time. He wants a contradiction because he wants to destroy America, but he also wants that to be practical. I mean, this is the same with everybody who hates identity. But they don't really want what other people have. That's not fundamental. They hate those people because those people allied with reality, with existence, with identity, and that's their enemy. They hold a grudge against existence. And so they fight proxy war on other people, motivated by envy. A proxy war with reality, I mean. Other people are just representations of reality. Now, in an organized intellectual nihilism, I mean, that's just the development of this basic psychological motivation. If you have this psychological motivation, it doesn't just result in beating your fists against concrete. That's one form it can take, but it can also take an intellectual form in which you try to fight reality with ideas. You try to demolish it intellectually, which is what Kant did. So nihilism doesn't have to be brutish, although it will, of course, ultimately result in that. That's the end point. Nihilism is just hatred of identity, motivated by the fact that human beings are capable of having emotions that don't line up with reality, and we have to choose to get our emotions in line with reality. And some people just choose irreducibly not to do that. Now, these people know it's irrational, and so they evade. You know, there's something Jordan Peterson says, I think he was quoting Nietzsche, someone, maybe Dostoevsky or someone. One of those people he always quotes. Someone talked about how nihilism is always a form of hatred for God. And that is a brilliant way of putting it, because it really is. You can't hate reality, keeping in mind that it's not a personal thing, that it's not a consciousness. You can only get angry at injustice, and injustice is something conscious beings do. You can only be nihilistic. You can only hate reality if you think it's out to get you. If you think it is conscious in a sense. If you think it's God, it's a spirit. So in that sense, nihilism is always religious. I think that's what Jordan Peterson says. Now, he doesn't understand exactly why that makes sense, but it does make sense. Because nihilism, the survival of a nihilistic mentality depends on the evasion, the basic evasion of the fact that existence is what it is. If you kept that in mind, you couldn't get mad at it. This is another way in which all of these things are the same. Evasion, hatred of identity, primacy of consciousness, they're all wrapped up. They're aspects of the same thing. And this is also why nihilism so often takes the form of envy, as you said, of having other people as the target, because that's a way of laundering your hatred for existence. If you came at it straight, you would just go crazy like James Taggart. So you have to pretend that you're angry at a consciousness. Some people can do that through being religious, but most people do it through just putting the blame on other people. That's what allows them to continue to indulge their destructiveness. Because they can't keep in mind, oh, I'm mad at inanimate, raw existence. You just can't keep up the anger there. So even the propagation of the anger is fundamentally dishonest. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.